I want to show you my approach to the technique of making a French seam. When you're seaming two pieces of fabric together in a French seam, you start by putting the wrong sides of the fabric together. And the basic principle is you sew a small seam, in this case it's 1/8 of an inch, and then you're going to encase this seam into a larger seam, into a 1/4 of an inch seam. So I've sewn the seam, and the next thing I do is to open it up, and I like to press this seam opened. Here's an example of what that looks like and how we're going to complete it. Now the reason I like to do this is because you can see how clean and how beautifully this is all lying, and then when you fold over your right sides together, how nicely this all behaves and cooperates. You can see the seam in there. You can see the stitches, and now what we're going to do is we're going to encase that 1/8 of an inch into a 1/4 of an inch seam. And you've got this very clean line to work with, so you can follow through along your 1/4 of an inch seam allowance line on your sole plate, and there we have it. So now we have, this is the wrong side of the fabric, we open up the right sides of the fabric, and you can see how nicely that lies. Now we are using a thicker, more stable cloth in the calico, but there is your French seam. Now generally French seams are sewn on a much more delicate fabric, a sheerer fabric. In this case I have a sample here prepared out of some georgette. This is a synthetic cloth, which is really easy to say if you're experimenting with French seam construction, try to work with a synthetic georgette because it's a hardy cloth, it doesn't fray very much, and it's easy to control. So here we are. I've got a brand new needle in here. It's a fine needle, a 7010, and I'm also using for this a 120 polyfill thread. So here you go. You can backstitch or you can tie your seam off at the end. And once again, this technique works whether you're working with a straight run, a straight like a side seam, or you're working with a curved seam, whether that's over the bust or the shoulder seam. So there we go. Once again, a new needle and fine thread. And now I'm going to go over to the press unit. I'm going to open up this seam and we'll complete the technique. So here I am at the pressing table, and I'm just going to open up that seam and give it a nice light press. So there we are. That's all nice and flat. And I'm going to go one step further here, and I'm going to fold the right sides together, and I'm going to press this again flat right on the edge of that seam. And you'll see how then this really sets you up. Everything is under control. You can just rock this into place. See there? And don't be afraid to move your iron around. You don't have to just pick up and press. You know, everything can be under control because I've got a fabric under here, a fabric covering the pressing unit. So you see, there's inside, there's the French seam started, and now we're going to finish it. So I'll just go over to the machine now and complete this. So here I am back at the machine to complete the French seam. And once again, just see how crisp that is. It's so much in line that I'm not even going to pin anything. I'm just going to line this up with my 1/4 of an inch guide on the sole plate and just run it through. This is working well because the fabric is, like I said before, it's very stable. It's a synthetic cloth. It doesn't jump around too much. It doesn't fray too much. Now, if this was a real project, I would probably just then tie off these ends. But you can see now how easy. We've pressed along the way. We've set everything up. And now look, there's our French seam and behaving quite well. Now, there's one more trick I want to show you. And we're going to go back to the pressing unit to start that. Now we've looked at the technique of sewing a French seam with a fairly stable cloth that doesn't fray. What about how the approach should be when you're working with a fabric like a fine silk? that phrase very easily. Now this is on the bias, and this is the area we're going to be trying to sew a seam with. So a trick I like to use when I'm working with a very fine silk in a French seam is to use a stabilizer. There's a lot of products on the market. You can get these in strip form, or you can get a stretch fusible. And you need to cut a fairly fine strip, and this needs to be applied to the right side of the fabric. So all I did was I cut this strip in half. Okay, that's all I did. And then I applied one strip to each side of the right side of the cloth. So here's this one done, and there's the strip applied there. Now the reason you put it in on the right side of the fabric is because you're going to start sewing your seam, as we've just seen, on the wrong side. You're going to encase that, and then you're going to encase the smaller seam in the bigger seam, thus hiding this strip. So let me go away and prepare that French seam and show you how it works out. So now we're going to make a French seam in a very testy cloth, which we have stabilized the edges using a fusible product, which is also cut on the bias. I've got a brand new needle in, and I'm using a fine thread, and I'm using glass head pins, or you can use silk pins. This is really important because if you have a dull pin, you can snag the cloth. A lot of things can happen that you're not going to be too happy about. And it's not fun unpicking a French seam because you're on the bias, and that very act of unpicking is going to stretch the cloth and put it out of shape. So this is the first pass, the 1/8 of an inch seam, and then I'm going to go over to the pressing unit, press this open, and then come back and close off the seam. So we'll be right back. So here's our French seam with the reinforcement onto the right side of the fabric. I sewed the first seam, I pressed that open, and then I folded right sides together, and I've pressed it again. So now we are ready to sew this seam. And I wanted to show you this cloth because it's silk, it's very difficult to control. You can see how easily it frays on the bias there. And also there's this metallic content in it. So if you're not using a really good sharp needle, a fine needle, then you can, if you hit one of these metallic threads, that can snag as well. So I feel this is stable enough. I'm not even going to pin it. I'm just going to start sewing at 1/4 of an inch. And I think you all now get the hang of this technique. It's much easier, I think, when you're dealing with a print cloth versus a plain, because the print does take over. So there is our seam. And then just a little press, even by hand. You've got that reinforcement in there, that's going to help you to control things. And there we are. I've used a straight stitch too. I don't generally use a small zigzag. I like just using the right equipment, the right thread, the right needle, and then I think a straight stitch is fine. So there's our seam, and you can't see any other reinforcement that has been applied to the right side, and it's very sturdy. The other thing is, of course, that with the reinforcement in there, the thread is grabbing onto another layer, so it's less likely to break. There we are.